In this video, I will explain what group selection is. Firstly, we need to know what selection is. Selection is where something is picked based on certain conditions. Natural selection means something is being selected in nature, and group selection is something that is being selected due to pressure around working as a group. To understand group selection, we must first understand kinship selection. Kinship selection is when people will help their own relatives survive and reproduce as they have more of their genes than someone who is not related to them. Group selection is effectively the same as kinship selection, where people will favour their own relatives, except just on a larger, wider scale. It is genetically better to help someone with more of your genes than someone who has less. In group selection, this effect creates a wide range of behaviours that are about helping my group and hurting a competing group. Groups can be very large, for example, a country or religion, which is relatively unique to humans, as we have been highly selected to create these larger groups in order to compete with other large groups. This means there is a highly competitive arms race for group cohesion and size only very recently in our evolutionary past, around 10,000 years ago. Many of the best and worst behaviours seen in humans are the result of evolving in a highly group-selected environment. Genocide is a good example of group selection, as it is simply one group trying to eliminate another. Charity is a good example of a good side of group selection, as charity is seen as helping the group, and is why people tend to donate to groups they are part of or gain some benefit from. Behaviours that evolve thanks to group selection are typically about helping and being of benefit to your group and hindering a competing hostile group. These behaviours lead to an effect where groups end up interacting with each other like organisms, where instead of individual cells, there is an individual people that form the group. This group within group selection ends up resembling simple life, as a group's goals are the same as would be seen in unicellular life. In a way, this is how multicellular life works, where one cell will work for the benefit of the other cells with similar genes. An example of group selection with groups interacting with each other was the interaction between Christians and Jews throughout most of history. Jews typically focused on specific jobs like money lending, while Christians would do the other work. This made two separate groups with different roles and selective pressures. The Hindu caste system is another example of groups interacting with each other, forming different roles and experiencing different selective pressures. So what sort of behaviours would you expect to come out of evolving in an environment that is heavily selected for acting in large groups? Well, there are a few that only make sense if an organism is part of a large group. People commit suicide when they feel like they are draining resources from the group. This is typically younger males or older childless females. This behaviour makes no sense in an individual level as ending your genetic line. However, it is a beneficial behaviour in relation to a group. By committing suicide, a person is effectively sacrificing themselves for the good of the large group. In a way, it is like cutting off a gangrenous finger. Another example is genocide. People have been committing genocide for far longer than modern times with our understanding of genetics. This is simply wiping out competing genes. If a group is causing harm to your group, either directly or indirectly, it is genetically a good idea to wipe out that group so they stop damaging your group. Charity and altruism are also highly group-selected behaviours. Individuals that aren't focused on group selection typically do not help, and instead focus only on themselves. Charity helps spread resources around the group, so when the time comes for the group to work together, there is a larger, healthier group than a more selfish, individualistic society. Racism is another example of group-selected behaviour. People tend to lump people into groups they are part of. If it didn't make evolutionary sense, then people wouldn't be racist. Stereotyping in general based off someone's group is also something people tend to do automatically. Behaviours that are seen in humans that clearly aren't going to help an individual survive and or reproduce are typically there because of group selection. So why did humans evolve to follow group-oriented behaviours so heavily and on such large scales? Because all of the organisms that didn't follow group-oriented behaviours were wiped out by the ones that did. This creates an interesting effect where groups of organisms become less group-oriented in a safer environment with less threats. When a threat is perceived, people naturally form up into large groups and fight the incoming threat. To summarise, group selection is about things acting in groups for the good of the group it is in. Heavy group selection has created certain behaviours in humans and other animals that makes them prone to certain behaviours like altruism, genocide and suicide that only make sense in a group selected context.